1 hour talk on fire, the use of fire, and how fire probably saved humanity back in the past. So first, what is fire? Let's just say what fire is. In our atmosphere, there's loads of oxygen, and oxygen loves to combine with other materials. And what it really likes to combine with is with carbon. It likes to combine with elements that are made of carbon. And in prehistoric days, this would be wood, grass, things that grow, plant kingdom. Uh, and the product of this is carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide and ashes, but also lots of light and heat. And that's what we're talking about, the light and the heat that fire gave to our ancient ancestors and how it saved the day. Now, what we're talking about is a species of mammal called Homo erectus. Homo erectus means man who stands up. And it first appeared on the scene somewhere 1 to 2 million years ago. It arose originally in forested areas. So our closest relative is the chimpanzee, who still lives mostly in forested areas. The forests would be a great source of fruit, of nuts, and other edibles, and also, when in danger, would provide a great place to scamper up to get away from predators. But what happened is that in the course of the Earth's history, the climate changed. The Earth's climate has always been changing, but not as fast as it is these days. I mean, it would change over the course of 10,000 years. Now it's changing in the course of one generation. But nevertheless, the change removed most of the forests where Homo erectus had been living and gave rise in many parts of the world to grasslands, tall grasses, which, although they're beautiful and some grazing animals like it, for human beings, it was very tough to get along because the source of food basically disappeared. The fruit, the nuts, and the other things that the forest provides. And it is now known from genetic studies and from other sciences that the Homo erectus almost disappeared from the face of the earth. As a matter of fact, virtually all members of that species that had moved out of Africa disappeared and died out. And in Africa itself, we may have gone down to no more than 1,000 surviving individuals. And we are all descendants of those 1,000 people. In fact, some geneticists say we're all descendants of one woman, actual scientific Eve, and maybe even one man, a scientific Adam. That's how close humans came to not surviving. So the question is, how did we survive? Here are people that are always hungry. They can't scamper up trees anymore, and they're not particularly fast. They're not particularly strong. They don't have big teeth or claws. They're very easily gotten to by cats, the big cats, the lions, and the leopards. So certainly what led to survival was the use of tools, which we're not going to discuss today, and the use of fire. Even with these two remarkable gifts that Homo erectus had, almost disappeared. Arthur C. Clarke wrote a wonderful book called 2001, A Space Odyssey. And in it, he has mankind almost disappearing, but some aliens come down and teach him how to use a club. Well, let's say that didn't happen. Let's say that the use of tools and fire saved the day without aliens coming down and showing us the way. So, but even with this, mankind almost disappeared, which shows you how how difficult it was to transfer from a woodlands environment, excuse me, to a savanna grasslands environment. And yet we did survive and now populate, or one might even say overpopulate the world. So, how did mankind learn to use fire? It probably didn't happen one time and one time only, but a series of events that eventually took place. It is speculated that in these hot grasslands, in the dry season, the areas are very prone to flash fires. And fires spread very quickly in the grasslands and are hot enough to destroy all living animal life in its path. Not necessarily all plant life, but all animal life. And after human beings, just pick up and hang up, Jim. Human beings were standing up by now and were able to see the fire coming. And in many cases, they were able to get out of the way. And as they come back, they see some small animal that was caught in the fire and burnt. It's charred, has an interesting smell. These are starving people. They'll eat anything. And one bold person, or maybe a group of people, picks up this burnt frog, turtle, who knows what, and eats it and is able to survive and does very well. And gradually, people learn after fires to come back to see things that were burnt and they can eat them safely. By the way, it has been noted in the wild that in some areas, chimpanzees will do the same thing. They will come to an area where there's been a forest fire and they will eat of the things that were caught and burned. Well, as time goes by, someone has the bright idea, why wait for a forest fire? Maybe, so just pick up, wait 2 seconds and hang up. Someone has this bright idea, maybe we could do the same thing. And they learn to keep a fire going. Once a fire is set, how to come back to an area where there still may be some fire going and to how to keep it going. And eventually, this leads to people who take care of the fire. In some African societies, there are people whose job is to take care of the fire, some of the more primitive tribes. And eventually, they'll learn how to make fire. Probably not so much with the Boy Scout technique of rubbing sticks together, which I once tried and I got nowhere at all. A little smoke maybe came up, but more likely to use flints and other materials that when you smack them together, many sparks come out. And if you put it on tinder, it will flame up. So mankind learned how to use fire and it spread through all the surviving species and they used it. So now we come to the main part of this talk. How then could it be used to save humanity? And the first thing is that the discovery of burnt animals ultimately led to cooking. Whether this was cooking with putting flesh or something directly in the fire, or putting it in some water and boiling something and putting it in the boiling material. And there are many, many reasons why this would be a wonderful thing. And I've tried to put them in order, but they're all important. The first one is that it kills pathogens, the cooking of food. Even today, when the COVID started, I read somewhere that if you want to be absolutely sure with takeout food, bring it home and put it in your oven for 20 minutes at 250 degrees and that will kill the COVID virus. So even in Africa, way, way back, hundreds of thousands of years ago, by cooking the food, they killed off the pathogens. This is very important because the evidence is that early humanity were scavengers. They would go through and try to come across something that had died of itself, but it may have died of disease. It may have been rotting for a while. So it killed off the pathogens. And along with that, it killed off any parasites that might be in either the dead meat or the thing they just killed. For example, tapeworms and other hookworms and other things that get into the human body that are parasites. So the cooking would be a 1-2 punch, getting rid of these things within the food itself. But there's more than that. Cooking makes food easier to digest. In some cases, it breaks down the plants, it breaks down the cellular material and makes it easier to digest. Now, when you're on the verge of starvation, this is very important because the body uses up calories to break down food. And the fewer calories it has to use to break down food, the more net calories you gain by eating it. And that's why after a huge meal, we sometimes feel exhausted or we want to go to sleep. And the reason for that is our body is busy digesting the food, and it's using up loads of energy. And this energy has not yet gotten into our system. And so by cooking food and by breaking down cell structure and making meat more tender, it reduced the loss of calories by eating food. And as I say, for people on the verge of starvation, this is very, very important. By the way, if anyone has a question, I'll be looking at the chat room, so you could send me a chat and I will respond to that as soon as I see the message come in or very soon thereafter. So I mentioned that it also makes it easier to chew. We all know that. Cooking food makes it easier to chew. And therefore, the human body went through some evolutionary changes. That is to say, right now, the head of a newborn baby is in general as much as a woman can stand. Any significantly bigger and even more women would die in childbirth, especially in the older days. Smaller, the head is smaller and the brain, there's less room for brains. So it's just about as big as it can get. Well, if food is more chewable, you have less need for massive teeth and you have less need for massive jaws. Picture the apes, the great apes. They have huge jaws. It's very obvious when you look at the skulls. But human beings now, cooking their food, had less need for these huge jaws and for huge teeth. So what did they have more room for inside the skull? Bigger brains. So as a result of cooking and making things easier to digest and more chewable, there's an evolutionary change in the skull, which is very obvious to archaeologists and anthropologists who dig up these ancient bones of ancient human beings. They see the evolution of the skull and they see how the area set aside for the brains increases. So this would be important mainly for children who don't have teeth yet, or maybe are past the nursing stage, and also especially for the elder people who didn't have good dentists in those days to make sure their teeth lasted. And so if the teeth lasted past the age of 25 or 30, these elders would be around longer and they would have the ability to pass down their knowledge from generation to generation, which is very important for the rise of civilization, to make use of the elders to pass on knowledge. And also, like today, they probably made very good babysitters, right, Adele? Adele is here with one of her grandchildren, so that's particularly true. I've hinted at this, but the cooking also greatly extends the diet. There are many foods that simply cannot be eaten unless they're cooked or boiled. Nuts, chestnuts, and other nuts could be a great source of food, but a lot of them cannot be eaten unless they're first boiled or heated in some way, because the plants put out certain poisons to prevent animals from eating them, except at a very specific time when the seeds are ready to germinate. The plants want the animals to eat them, get the seeds in their digestive tract, excrete them, and then the seeds are dispersed. But most of the time, you can't eat the fruit or you can't eat the nuts. But when you boil it, you break down the poisons and you make it edible. So it extends the number of foods, both in quality and in quantity, that can be eaten. And we also know that it makes a more varied diet, and a more varied diet is a healthier thing. So all these things in terms of cooking give rise to a healthier species, which has a better chance of surviving. Yet there's more about cooking. I sound like a salesman for Ginzo knives, yeah? There's more. If you act now, you can get two for the price of one. Well, cooking, and particularly things like smoking, makes it easier to preserve foods longer. Even if you kill off the pathogens and the parasites, some food at a certain point just becomes inedible. But if you smoke it or cook it, it lasts longer. And once again, that's very important for people on the verge of starvation. And so it's now worthwhile for human beings to hunt larger game, even with the risk. You knock off a woolly mammoth, or you knock off a giraffe, or something really big, and you've got a lot of food, and you can make it last longer. So it's worthwhile going after big game. But to go after big game, you need cooperation of more than one hunter. And so it is believed by people who study the development of humanity that it's at this point that the basic unit went from the nuclear family, which roamed around certain areas, to perhaps what we might call extended families or clans, because they needed to work together to go after the big game. And it's true that occasionally one member might be killed in such hunting, but it was worth it. It was worth it for people on the verge of starvation. So the nuclear family gives rise to the clan or the extended family, and that has many, many ramifications. Also, what makes this happen is that before cooking, the area, especially in the grasslands, could support only a limited number of people. Now, with diversification and making food last longer, you could support more people. And you don't look upon another family as a rival for your food, but you look upon them as someone who you can cooperate with in order to get food. There's a whole change in culture, and human beings become together now to live in large families. Wouldn't have happened without cooking. So you say, well, that's quite enough, but there's more. With this extra food, human beings can now afford to feed other animals, namely first the wolf. And the wolf will eventually be bred to morph into dogs and used for hunting. And using dogs as hunting, or with their great sense of smell to detect game, further enhances the amount of food you could have. And ultimately, but this is later on, it will lead to shepherding. The fact that there is food to feed these extra animals, but shepherding is pretty much down the way, except for dogs. Dogs may have been domesticated as far back as 25, 30,000 years ago, maybe more. Just we haven't found evidence of it. Okay, so there's still more about cooking. This is the major thing. Cooking gets rid of the blood, which predators can smell. A lion can smell the blood from 2 miles away. Cooked meat, not so far away. And so it gets rid of the predators. Now we all think, even if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you got to admit that barbecued food smells good. And I want to go into that right now. There is no such thing really as a good smell or a bad smell. A good smell is one that we associate with good things, like a newborn baby. They have a certain smell to them, and it's delicious.
So we eat them.
So we eat them. A bad smell is associated with things that we've learned to fear, like death and disease. So we've learned that excrement or the smell of urine or the smell of a decaying body, these are all bad smells, but they weren't originally bad. A baby will wallow in his own filth and not think there's anything wrong with it because the baby has not yet learned that this is a bad smell. So we associate smells, good or bad, with the effect that it has on us. And therefore, we've learned that cooked food has a good smell because we associate it with good taste and we associate it with living. So that's where dividing smells into good or bad originates, with the fact that food can be eaten. Okay, so that's it with cooking. There's probably more, but these are the ones that I thought of. So what is the next important thing about fire? Well, fire, you have to put a little energy in to start it, but then it becomes exothermic. That's the technical term, which means it gives off lots of light and heat. The heat can be used for cooking, of course, but it could also be used to keep us warm, particularly at night, particularly in seasons like the winter season. And what happens is humanity can now, due to fire and the warmth from the fire, can extend the range where it can live. And humanity now begins to move out of Africa for the second time, but this time for good, and can go to many parts of the world that were not open to it before. And even due to the warmth from the fire, it can survive a very radical change of climate known as the ice ages. And the last ice age only ended about 8,000 or so years ago. And it could survive very nicely due to the warmth of the fire in places where it would not be able to survive before. Furthermore, if you get wet in the sudden downpour, which could lead to hypothermia, you stay by the fire and you dry yourself off pretty quickly. So that's another great benefit of fire. Because we can keep ourselves warm without, by fire, the humans do not need all that fur anymore. Because fur is basically to keep you warm in cold weather. So what happens evolution-wise, if you don't need the hair anymore? It's good to start losing it all over your body, because hair is the place where parasites and bugs love to nest on humans. The one remaining place is lice in hair on the head and other parts of the body. But if you watch baboons or chimpanzees or gorillas, they spend a lot of times grooming each other. It's not only the social contact, which is there, but it's also picking bugs out because you have hair, but human beings didn't need hair. So what does that lead to? It leads to the loss of hair in most parts of the body. So what's good about that? See, all these things are connected. What's good about that is humans now develop the ability to cool off by sweating. Sweating has a cooling effect. And what happened in Africa, and still happens in some parts of Africa, is that humans, tribes people, will chase animals. Now they say, can they catch a gazelle? No, they can't catch a gazelle. The gazelle will run away from them. But they track the gazelle and they catch up to it. These are people trained to run for long distances for long times. And they keep chasing the gazelle, and the gazelle gets more and more tired because the gazelle cannot sweat and lose body heat. And what happens is the gazelle ultimately becomes overcome with heat and can't move. I've seen films of natives in Africa today. Just hold up a second, Daniel. Natives in Africa today chasing down an animal just this way. May take a good part of the day, but it can be done. So humans develop the sweat, they don't need the hair. But this leads to a problem. What is the problem? Humans arose, Homo erectus, with a very careful balance in receiving ultraviolet rays. Now, ultraviolet rays are slightly shorter in wavelength than the visible light spectrum. Too much of them is very harmful. It breaks down the tissues, the cells, and gives rise to forms of cancer, particularly skin cancer. But the body needs some UVs to make vitamin D, which is used in making bones. So there's got to be a balance between ultraviolet, how much you get. Well, as humans started losing hair, they started receiving more ultraviolet. So the body developed a defense, evolutionary-wise, called melanin. Melanin is a dark compound, it's dark brown, that absorbs preferentially ultraviolet light. And so in Africa, people developed dark skin as they lost hair. We don't know the original color of the skin, but it's dark skin. And the melanin would be there to absorb the ultraviolet. Well, what happens as we move into countries that have less sunshine and less ultraviolet? If we have all this melanin, the body will absorb too much ultraviolet. So as people go north, they begin to lose the ability to have melanin, and their skin becomes lighter and lighter. And eventually in Scandinavia, it becomes quite white. But it still retains the ability, in most cases, to produce melanin if the body says it needs it. So when does this happen? The summer season starts, you're outdoors a lot, and you begin to tan. What is tan? The body is saying, I'm getting too much ultraviolet. I need some melanin. And the body starts producing some more melanin to protect you against the extra ultraviolet that you're getting. It's an interesting world, how so many things play off against each other. There are some people who cannot produce melanin. Many Irish people cannot produce melanin, and they will sunburn much easier than non-Irish people. Redheads also are known for not being able to produce melanin. So there are certain people, certain groups of people that seem to have lost the ability to produce melanin. But this whole thing started as human beings started to provide warmth for themselves. So due to sweating. Another advantage that accrued from the use of fire is protection against predators. In the savannas in Africa, the main predators learned that fire was a dangerous thing. Even the smell of it meant fire was approaching, and they're very wary of fire. And if you want to protect yourself out in the plains, the best thing to do is light a fire at night. And that will keep the predators away. And there must have been loads and loads of losses to predators out in the grasslands. So particularly at night, lions, the films you see of lions and leopards hunting are during the day. That's because that's when we can film them. Lions and leopards do most of their hunting at night. And so for the primitive people to be able to light fires at night would keep the predators away. And that, of course, was very important. Some animals eventually learned to live with it, like dogs. Now dogs will curl up by the fire. But at first, they too must have been very wary of the fire. So it really means that for the first time, maybe, humans could get a good night's sleep. Most species of animals are not awake for 16 hours, say, and then sleep for 8, thereabouts. Most animals sleep fitfully through the entire 24-hour cycle. And that's because they're nervous of the dark, or they hunt in the dark, or they're nocturnal to start with. Human beings now could get a good night's sleep because they knew they were protected as never before against the night hunters. Another advantage of the light was smoke. Smoke, if set right along the campfire at night, can be used to keep insects away. It's the original citronella, it's the original DEET. And if you watch any of these programs on these channels with survivors, and they're in the jungle, and how do they survive at night? If they know what they're doing, they set a smoky fire at night, and that keeps the predators away. I mean, the insect predators away. So they learned how to do that as well.
She never came up,
Who never came
the
up?
dog.
Hello?
Well, I was out down here.
Yeah, I know, and I had to go to the
Someone
bathroom.
is not muted and is making a lot of noise. Is that Mel's iPad? Okay. Okay, so now that they can have light during the nighttime, why not use light during the day? And that's to be able to now go into caves. It's kind of dangerous to go into caves. Why? Well, one reason is you never know who's going to be in that cave. It could be something big. It could be something small. Big, I mean, it could be a cave bear. You wouldn't want to walk in there and find a cave bear in there. Or it could be snakes or scorpions. But with light, you could go into a cave, see what's in there, and collectively drive out whatever is in there. clean it up with the light that you have, and make it your home. Now, how good is that for protection at night, for protection against the elements? And so sometime after the use of fire, mankind moves into caves and is greatly protected against things living and against the elements as well. So the caves particularly are great against hypothermia in wet, cold seasons. You could stay warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer, which is important, almost as important to stay cooler in the summer. And it gives great protection, but it's also a good place to store food. Food will rot less quickly in hot climates if stored in a cave. It's much cooler in there. So all that is very good, the light at night. Now, predators have reflectors in their eyes, which makes them be able to see at night. Human beings don't see too well at night. So there was really nothing left but to go to sleep, maybe after some sex. I mean, that's really, you could do at night. But you can't do sex all night.
Some can.
Well, I can't. But with light now, when you no longer could go out and hunt and do what you do, you have time now, especially in the winter seasons, for sociability. You can talk, you could sew, you could do many activities, and you become much more productive. You could plan hunts, you could tell stories, you can make tools. So it extends the day from daylight hours to basically the cycles we're in now. Excuse me. So this is very important. Now, I'm giving concurrent with this a course on science in the news, and someone just made an interesting discovery about cave art. You know, caves are in the innermost, the caves art. You're familiar with those paintings. What should I do? Pick up, wait a second and a half. See how many crank calls I get? It's amazing. These are not by the entrance. These are in the back of the cave. And it is always thought that the paintings in the back of the cave made the area special. And that's why these paintings were done in the back of the cave. But a recent study in Israel showed that within these back caves, which they modeled, they went into some real caves in Europe where the paintings were found. If you go in there with enough torches to keep the place lit, it will start to use up the oxygen. And it leads to a condition known as hypoxia. And hypoxia is a hallucinatory stage before you pass out. You got to be careful with hypoxia. But you have an elevated feeling. You feel one with the universe. You're intoxicated. And maybe they now surmising that the first religious experiences took place in these inner caves as the torches started to use up the oxygen. And therefore, rather than the painting being in the back of the caves, because the back of the caves were holy, it's the other way around. The painting, rather than the paintings making the area holy, is that this area was very special in the first place because they got these feelings inside of them. Oneness with the buffalo, who knows what. So the areas were special. So they went into these special areas to decorate them for religious purposes. So it could even be the rise of religion, but that's speculative. Just because some guy in Israel reported it, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. Okay, so then there are some other things that we know were used right away. the primitive man and women started making weapons. Took a while for the bow and arrow, but they got there. But they certainly had spears. That was something they developed easier. But it's known for those who are involved in survival that if you take a wooden spear, for example, and put the tip in a fire, not enough to burn it, but to scorch it, it will harden the point and make a much more hard spear, piercing spear. And so the use of, and they have found in these caves, going back to the rise of the use of fire, they have found weapons that have been preserved that have obviously been hardened by use of fire. So all those things contributed. So it's no wonder that fire has had a particular fascination for human beings. There's something about it, you could just look at it and stare at it. There's something very important to it. And there are many religions that one way or another associate fire with something magic and important. This is later on, but still the memory is there, how important fire is. The Zoroastrians out of Persia worshipped fire. They were fire worshipers. That was part of their religion. In the Bible, God is revealed to Moses in a burning bush, fire, and then later in an area, Sinai, that sounds pretty much like a volcanic area. It's fire again. Fire definitely is given religious and major significance in our lifetime. So fire is often seen as a symbol of purity. There are sacred fires in temples that keep burning all the time. What's called in Hebrew, the Ner Tamid, the eternal light in temple days. And these fires represented God. In the Persian religion, the good God was the God of light, the God of fire. Ahura Mazda was his name. No relation to the car Mazda, I think. They were never extinguished. And no Zoroastrian, pick up for a second and a half. No Zoroastrian ritual was ever without the use of fire. In Greek legend, the thing that really got the gods ticked off was Prometheus stealing the fire and bringing it to humanity. And for that, he was punished eternally, because that raised, in the Greek legends, that raised human beings to the level of gods, having the mastery of fire. So Prometheus represented human striving, the quest for knowledge to improve yourself during technology. It's all over the place. Mary Shelley wrote The Modern Prometheus. That was her original name for Frankenstein. Human beings moving ahead with technology. It's alive, it's alive. Well, that was Mary Shelley's book. So it's there. Well, as time went by, human beings found more and more use for fire. One, which primitive cultures learned very early, was to use, to burn scrub, to set fires on purpose, to promote a healthier grasslands. It's now acknowledged that one of the terrible things that was done in the early days of forestry in the United States was to stop all fires. Fires have a beneficial value to forests. They clear away the scrub. The old growth can withstand the fire, and many seedlings and nuts are activated by the heat of the fire. It was a big mistake. And now controlled fire is seen to have a beneficial value to the land. And very easy, certainly by the time of the beginning of agriculture, human beings learned to start fires controllable fires or fires that would burn themselves out to sort of purify the land and get rid of the bad stuff. Oh, I don't want to forget, my father used to have a saying, which was always fight fire with fire, which is probably why they never let him be a fireman. That's another joke. I mean, you get one at the beginning and the end of every lecture for the same price. The final thing that, and this comes around later, is human beings went for a long time through what was called the Stone Age. The Stone Age was where stones were the main implement for tools, for defense, for fighting, etc. And then someone around a campfire probably put a rock that was kind of greenish in color, greenish blue, which means it had some copper in it, by the campfire. And the next day awoke to find something shiny and kind of hard, right where the fire had been. And this, of course, was the beginning of metallurgy. Metallurgy didn't happen overnight, but it did occur eventually due to the fire. At first, fires could only reach a certain temperature, so you could only smelt down copper. Iron requires a much higher temperature and a much greater technology, even though there's much more of iron around than copper. And but this is again due to fire. And later on, copper would be mixed with a little bit of tin to get bronze. And once again, humanity changed, went into the metallurgy age, starting with the Bronze Age, which lasted for a few thousands of years. So that's it. That's basically it. Are there any questions? Does anyone want to make a comment? I know that if we were all sitting in the same room, there would be more comments. Something about Zoom reduces the amount of comments that are made. But if anyone would like to say something, please unmute yourself. Can they unmute themselves, Lynn?
Yes.
They can unmute themselves or put it in the chat. But yeah, please, I could put this into gallery view so we can all see each other. If you want to do that on your computer.
Yeah. Does anyone have any comments or would like to make any?
Susan?
Yeah.
Susan has.
In clay, which is the material, my bedrock material,
Oh, yes.
feel that people made baskets first from the grasses and lined them with clay, mud, to make them less porous. And that at some point they imagined that it got burned in a fire, that it baked. And they saw the results, and that's where the first clay pots.
That's a wonderful point.
Yeah, it's
As a
interesting.
matter of fact, as an aside note to that, what archaeologists love the best is if a community was attacked and burned by fire.
Right,
Because anything made out of clay
right,
is preserved forever.
right.
And oh boy, there was a fire here. We're going to learn a lot today. And in effect, it does last almost forever.
I know.
And of course, glass comes out of fire too.
Right.
There's certain materials, if you mix them, you get glass out of it.
One of my early teachers said, remember that that's the longest living thing before you fire a piece. It took me years to say, I kept saying, do I want this to last forever? No way.
Well, it's probably pretty good. Yeah, any other comments? All right, well.
Marty, I have a comment or
Sure.
a question. So it takes a long time for us to change or evolve. And as we hit the age where things are melting and, the climate change and everything, how do you see the mankind changing? Are we going to grow hair again or shed more? Or,
I see something very radical.
Okay.
I see human beings being combined with electronics.
Whoa.
Like the $6 Million Man was the forerunner of this. I definitely see if we're going to survive outside this earth, which we're using up, that
Mm.
space travel, that's definitely got to be a hybrid of electronic components and humans. And I do see, maybe it'll take 100 years, 200 years, but at the rate we're going with artificial intelligence and
Mhm.
with miniaturization, and it's not bad. I mean, why should we not get a heart that will last forever? Why worry about heart attacks? I definitely see that as the next stage. If we're going to survive at all, we're going to survive as hybrids.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, a lot of us are walking around now with titanium thighs and knees and artificial this, artificial that. I say we're going to go much further along those lines. Definitely. Space travel, the nearest star is a few light years away. So even if we go at 1/10 the speed of light to get there, and I don't know if we ever can, but if we can, it's going to take 30 years just to get there. And if we get to Alpha Centauri, what happens if we see a sign, no parking or humans not welcome? Then we got to turn around and go back home again. So the only way to survive is for us to genetically modify the humans. There was a report this week, and it scares the hell out of me, that some scientists have put some mice, some monkey and human cells together in some sort of a hybrid. Their ultimate goal is to be able to grow organs for transplants. But I mean, the technology is there. Is the religion, the science, the social mores working fast enough to catch up with science? No. And so decisions will be made, maybe secretly. You could bet on it. So we will evolve, but we'll evolve pretty quickly. Or we'll perish.
Perish the thought.
Okay, well, thanks so much for showing up, everybody.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Nobody else has any questions then? All right. Thank you so much, Marty. And
Okay,
Judy, thank you for joining us all today. I hope you
Bye.
enjoyed it.
Thanks,
Bye.
Marty.
keep the light
Bye.
burning.
The light burning.